Remember in the last video, Jesus said, if you want to be first, if you want to be right there, first with God, you want to be close to God and all, it says you shall be last or servant of all. Well, we're going to go kind of fast here. The next part, he goes on and continues, and this time it says this. He took a child, a little child, by the way. It says, where is it? He says, and he took a child and set him in the middle of them. Put that little boy right there. Right in the middle. And then it says, and when he had taken him in his arms, so he was small enough so he lifted him up. So we're talking like kids here, although these are little girls right here. You know, I have little girl figures here. He took this little boy, you know, and he lifted him up. So here's a little boy. Here's parents here. These are some parents here. And he took a little boy, and he lifted him up right in his arms here. Took a little toddler type little boy, and he lifted him up in his arms. Wow, this is what Jesus said. This is radical, by the way. Revolutionary, shocking, stunning, staggering, pretty amazing here. And when he had taken up in his arms, he said to them, whoever shall receive one of such children, see, Jesus is speaking to all these apostles right here. Whoever shall receive one of such children in my name receives me. And whoever shall receive me receives not me, but him that sent me. Now, there's something very interesting here. Number one, he's really not saying become like a child. In this particular case, he's saying whoever shall receive such a child, and he's talking about the type of person you ought to be, an adult who receives children, and receives me, and whoever receives a child in my name. And my name means my representative, a person who is like me. And he's saying that Jesus is saying he's like a child. This is really deep. It's really good. It says, receives me, and whoever shall receive me receives him. In other words, God is like a child. The child is like representing him. Wow, this is great. So who is a child, number one? We'll get to what this really means. But who is a child? Maybe it was a child of Peter. Maybe it was Peter's child. We don't know if Peter had kids. Probably did. Most people had kids. And they wanted kids in that century, you know, that time. So maybe that boy was Peter's boy. We don't know. Or maybe it was another member of that group, one of the apostles' kids. You know, who was with him here and there or something as they were traveling. I don't know. Maybe it was another member. Maybe it was just a neighbor. Maybe it was a boy who was playing nearby right outside. So he said, hey, come here, young man. Come here, boy. Picked him up. Maybe he was playing nearby. Or maybe it's just any child around there. Maybe it was a child inside the home right there. Probably was. Maybe it was just any kid there. Maybe it was the least beautiful. Kids are beautiful. I mean, I look at children, they're just beautiful. People are beautiful. God's made human beings that are really beautiful. But maybe he didn't take one who was really, really, really beautiful or something, like a little kid, like a little model or something. Maybe he was the least beautiful. Jesus, he didn't take some child that everyone said, oh, what a beautiful little child or something. Or maybe he actually picked the worst acting one. Maybe there's a bunch of kids around, a lot of kids around the streets and all, and he picked the kid who was maybe worst acting. Why do you say that, Gordon? Because, you know, Jesus really picks the lost sheep, the one who wandered off, or the prodigal son in Luke 15. You know, he really focuses on that. Anyway, who knows? He picked up this child and said, whoever receives this child receives me. All right, why a child? We're going to go through a couple lists real quick. This is so good. So try and remember this. Try and learn this. I'll try and go fast. Why a child? Because in that time period, not nowadays, especially in the Western part of the world, the child in that time period in the first century and all was least, lowest, and last. They were the least, the lowest, and the last. Not in God's sight, mind you. You know, in other words, God really says you have to become like a child. As a matter of fact, he said that in Matthew 18, the parallel passage. He said, whoever wants to be in the kingdom of heaven, you have to become like a little child, to enter the kingdom. Wow, be converted and become like children. But he chose the least, lowest, and last. What does that mean? Well, the least is they're kind of in the ladder of people's positions. They were last. Those enslaved, way down, the servants and all. They just weren't as important and all. So they were the least of the community. They were the lowest in position and last. That's so different nowadays. I think Jesus in his gospel is what primarily put just the opposite, reverse it. He turned the world upside down, basically. It's upside down for the world, and sometimes in our world it's the same. They were the last, Now, they were the weak. Children, little kids are weak, vulnerable. They're helpless. They're kind of vulnerable. In other words, they can't fight back of adults. Adults are in charge, so they become like the vulnerable. They're underneath them and all. Helpless little kids. Kids, especially as babies are totally helpless. They depend on the parent to feed them and everything. All right, they're kind of near the bottom. That's why Jesus is choosing the child. So he takes people who are near the bottom, and there's adults who are near the bottom, maybe poor, or neglected, or they're not important. They are important to God's society. That's what Jesus is really saying. But they're not important. In other words, they're not in offices they're not a president of a company, or they're not high officials, or whatever. They're kind of the lower end of the spectrum. And that world, it's definitely not a religious model for adults. See, that was shocking when he said this. He's saying this and other places that children are kind of a model for adults. Children are less important in that time period, insignificant, low status. By the way, girls under 12 could even be sold as slaves. Can you believe that? That's like, what? Yeah, a father could take a child and say, I'm going to give this child to you as a slave, as a servant, to serve your family and all. And they would get money for it. That's legally, it was okay in that time period. Are you getting this? This is crazy, amazing. The child is more needy. It's the parents that provide the needs of the child. The children are not ones who provide for the needs of the parents, okay? Seek out, basically he's saying, seek out not those who can do things for us. You shouldn't be seeking out friendships that get things for yourself. He's saying the kingdom of heaven is subjects, people who, and even kids who are not trying to get people who you can get things for. He says we should seek out those who we can do things for. Like look for friendships that you can be a blessing to, not be blessed by. For by so doing, we are seeking the society of himself. He says, whoever receives the child receives me. That's a society of that he's looking for. In other words, he's comparing himself to children, which is pretty amazing. So, again, who is he referring to? By the way, who is Jesus referring to? Actual children? But he put a child there? Or is he saying just lower members of society? Is he talking about just lower members of society, including adults? Or is this representing believers, little children as believers? I personally believe it's all three. It's definitely the children. It's also those who are poor and, who can't do for themselves. They're needy. And also for believers are called like little children. But anyway, here's the last thing I'm going to say. His kingdom is made up of childlike subjects. It eliminates these ambitions and desires. Here's a world, here's children in that time period. These are ruling people who rule. He calls us to serve. That's what he said in the last verse, and we talked about it in the last video. So children they serve. They clean the house, they do chores and all that. The world wants everyone. The world's type of thinking should be first. You should be first. Well, the child in that world especially was last. The world has people that seeks for power, like control of others and rich people and all, where the child is in a weak, vulnerable, place. They're dependent on the parents and adults. Looking down on, this is a world's way to look down on others. And the children are looking up to or look to those above them. So this is what God's kingdom is made up of. These type of people, not these. All right, the proud. The world says be proud, and you need to be proud and all. The child is humble. They're in a low status, humble position. To be honored and respected, and the child has to honor and respect others. Okay, so this right here is an unhonored spot. The child's spot. They're kind of disrespected a lot of times, or the child has to respect the elders and all that. So this is a kingdom of heaven is made up of these type of people. And then he says, or not he says, but it's the highest position. And the world is trying to get in a high position. Jesus says, humble yourself, be in the lowest position, like a child. Of course, I'll go back into that second. The influencer, the world is trying to influence where they have no influence. The child's position, especially in that day, had no influence, and they don't have that much influence nowadays. Okay, the world is of people who give things, where the child is the one that's given things. They can't give. It's the parents, it's the adults that give things. Now, so I kind of have two different things going here. But the main one, I think, I really talked about the position and what it's like to be a child in that time period. Last, least, lowest, and all. However, Jesus is saying something a little different, but it's kind of a combination. You have to get your mindset into what it was like in that century, 2,000 years ago, in that culture. And that culture is the same culture a lot of times in other places of the world. But it's not children first, But in that time period, children had a low position, a low status, sort of like a slave, like a servant. So here, though, the other thing, that's kind of what a child is like. But the second thing is what he's really saying is whoever shall receive such a child. You need to kind of know what a child's position is, which we just talked about. But then he says, whoever receives a child receives me. So he's saying, Jesus is saying, he himself is like a child. He humbled himself. This is the Lord of everything. This is the most powerful person in Mark's gospel and in the Bible. He's the most powerful. And then he puts himself in a position of the least, the weakest, not the most powerful, but the weakest, lowest, last position. And he's literally saying that's what I'm like. And he's telling his disciples to become like that, like a child. And if you guys receive a child, you're receiving me. Because that's me right there. The child is representing Jesus. You see the two things? One is what a child's position is, what they're like. And then the other is what he's saying is become like that person who receives. You're supposed to be receiving. If you receive a child or a little disciple or whatever, a person in a low position, could be poor, needy, weak, and all that, then you're receiving God. Because God humbled himself, became like this. As a matter of fact, Jesus actually became a child. The God of heaven became a little child. Wow, and grew up as a child. And if you receive a low position instead of looking down on, you put them in a high position, you're receiving me. I hope you get that. That's pretty rich stuff. So if you didn't get it, redo this, real quick. All right, God bless you. Thanks for listening.